Hello and welcome back. This week we're going to be talking about file systems. Our objectives this week are going to be to learn about file systems, the different kinds of file systems such as FAT, NTFS, and APFS. We're going to learn about hard drives and their parts. So we've already learned a little bit about hard drives from our computer architecture section. However, this week we're going to be digging into their parts a little bit. And then we'll also be getting into some new vocabulary in regards to file systems. So what is a file system? Well, first of all, one job of your operating system is to manage your file system. It organizes and keeps track of all of your data. And when we say managing, we mean storing your files, keeping track of them, your documents, your music, your homework assignments, all of the different things that go along with your files in your filing system. And then also the files that go along with your operating system. So your computer has a ton of files that it uses that you will rarely see or know very much about, most likely. A computer's way of organizing data is similar to this filing cabinet example. The filing cabinet itself represents storing all of the information. Each cabinet might have one or more drawers, such as a computer might have one or more storage devices. The filing cabinet will have folders, directories, subdirectories, and files within, just like those you might see if you open your File Explorer on your Windows or Finder on a Mac. Graphical interface designers make the folders within your computer, those little manila folders, look just like the ones you might find in an actual filing cabinet. Now, it's a little bit different on a Mac, but it is still the same concept. They'll probably be blue. I think you can change the color of these. When you see a file icon in your File Explorer, you know that you can double click on that file, and within there will be many other files, maybe more subdirectories, or it could potentially be empty. However, your computer is also going to need to know what is inside of that file or inside of that directory in order to load it for you so that you can view what is inside of that directory. It needs to know where to find that information in your storage, meaning that particular folder has an address at some location within your hard drive. Remember in the data structure section when we talked about your computer's memory being like a warehouse full of boxes, and those boxes all had addresses associated with each one? Well, it's kind of like that, only now we're using a file system in order to manage and keep track of those memory address location. Different kinds of computers use different kinds of operating systems. This means that each type of operating system is going to search through and organize their files in a different type of a way. For instance, I have both a Mac and a Windows Surface computer. Each of these are going to look through their files in a different way. Now, I'm going to be passing data all the time through both of these computers. And the way that I do that nowadays is I'll just upload my files to Google Drive and I'll pass them back and forth that way. But back in the day, I used to have to use an external hard drive before I was more familiar with using the internet to do something like this. I would take an external hard drive, such as a flash drive or such as a USB stick, and I would plug it into one computer, grab the files, and plug it into the other. Or so you would think I would be able to do something like this. The problem is that the Mac operating system uses a different file system than the Windows operating system. So it was not that simple. So let's talk about three different kinds of filing systems right now. The first is FAT, the second is going to be NTFS, and the third is going to be APFS. So FAT stands for File Allocation Table. Now, this was one of the first types of file systems that was known to a computer. It's really a simple file system, and it was originally designed for small disks and simple structures. The FAT file system is named for its method of organization, the file allocation table, which resides at the beginning of the volume. So that's a very common word you'll hear is volume or drive. It resides at the beginning of the volume. To protect the volume, 2 copies of these tables are kept in case one becomes damaged. A volume or drive formatted with the FAT file system is allocated in clusters. The size is determined by the size of the volume. For the FAT file system, the cluster must fit in 16 bits and must be a power of 2. And we're talking about size here. We have had the FAT12, the FAT16, and the FAT FAT32, which is the most common one. It's the most updated one now. FAT32 offers similar features as NTFS, which we'll get into in just a second, except individual files on a FAT32 drive can't be over 4 gigabytes in size. That is the maximum. And there is so much more to know about FAT32, and I have left some awesome articles and videos in the module for you to get into so that you can learn more about them and be able to answer the questions in the quiz. But that's a brief overview of the FAT file system, the file allocation table system for files. One thing you should know is that it is definitely going to be a more versatile type of file system, meaning it can go between a Mac or a Linux or a Windows. Most computers or external devices are going to be able to utilize this file system. All right, now let's talk about the NTFS file system. It means the New Technology File System. Now, looking at this slide, you'll see that I have the properties window of my computer open, of my device, in particular for my C drive, which this is the main hard disk partition that contains the operating system for my device. I only have my device partitioned into one C drive, and we'll get into what that means in a little bit here. All you need to know is that this particular partition of my computer's hard drive is called my C drive, and you can see where it's highlighted that it is showing that I have the NTFS file system. This is the type of filing system that most Windows computers use. Like I said before, they still sometimes use the FAT file system in certain scenarios. However, it is most common to see the NTFS file system. It was first introduced in 1993 and is used in newer versions of the Windows operating system. Some awesome features that are most likely normal to you that past computers did not have would be the following. You'll see here on the slide it says that we have security, so it allows permissions to the files. So we have security, so this allows separate permissions to the files. You are used to this, being able to lock a file or not lock a file or make it readable or writable. These might be things you're used to, but this was not something that could be done in previous file systems. Compression. So remember how we've been zipping and sending off our websites? That's called compression. That's where we compress our files down into a smaller format so that they're easier to send over a network. Encryption, so protect the data from unauthorized access. So we now have the ability to encrypt our files, and this is done through our file system. So like I mentioned before, the FAT file system, the largest file you could have was 4 gigabytes. Well, now we can have 4 gigabyte individual files and larger partitions. So now we have the ability to have larger files. And finally, there is journal. Journaling keeps track of the files that are deleted, created, and modified. And so these are just some things that this newer file system that you're probably used to, but most people who grew up with the younger versions of the computers did not have, and so they're a huge benefit in this day and age. So according to the Apple website, the current versions that are available for file systems on the Mac OS are as follows. We have the Apple file system. You can see here on the slide, Apple file system, APFS, and it is used by Mac OS version 10.13 or later. The Mac OS extended, so the file system used by Mac OS in 10.12 or earlier, and then we have MS-DOS or the FAT and the exFAT file system that are compatible with Windows. Now, I want to mention right here this exFAT. That is your external FAT, so that's going to be something that's used in USB and in an external hard drive. However, these are the current versions of file systems that are available on the Mac OS. So Apple's Mac operating system can always read the Microsoft Windows NTFS formatted drives, but cannot write to them. So if you plug that in, you'll be able to read to that drive, you'll be able to read from it, but it will not be able to write new files in. So your files stored on the NTFS drives will appear read-only or locked when you open them, and you will not be able to edit, rename, or delete the existing files, nor save any files to the NTFS drive on a Mac. If you'd like to learn anything more about the Apple's file system, you can check out their documentation at support.apple.com, and I'll put a link in the description or in the module so that you can go look at their file system. Apple always has documentation on their website so that you can learn about their systems if that's something that you're interested in. In order to understand the nuts and the bolts of how a file system is going to work, you should know a little bit about the hard drive. So first of all, it has this platter and it turns around on a spindle. There is a head that is attached to the actuator arm. This is going to read and write information to and from this disk. And the spindle is going to spin this disk around. So the platter is where the data is stored and has different rings of information called tracks. Each one of these circles is a track. It almost reminds me of the inside of a tree when you cut a tree down. You can kind of see this is kind of what that reminds me of for some reason. Some tracks are larger than others depending on where they are on the hard drive. So if it's towards the center, obviously it's going to be smaller, and the farther it gets towards the outer edge, the larger that track becomes. Now the hard drive is organized into different wedges. So kind of if you're going to cut up a pizza, these are called disk sectors. Each one of these are sectors on the disk, and each section of a track on the particular sector is called a track sector. So we had originally split these up into tracks, and then we determined that kind of like a pizza, we had these disk sectors, and now we have individual track sectors within each of the disk sectors. So, and this would continue all the way down to the middle there. Data is stored among several track sectors that are clumped together that are called clusters. So here we had the one track sector, but when we add a couple of more track sectors in, we have what are called clusters, and this is clusters of information and data. If you put it all together, here is a diagram of a hard drive's disk and the actuator arm that reads the data on and to and from the disk. When you get into the modules, don't forget to watch the Introduction to File Systems video. This is going to talk to you about how the operating system is managing the information within these clusters and sectors and tracks. So you're going to want to make sure you watch that particular video. Alright, so now let's talk about the new vocabulary that I mentioned at the beginning of this video. So the first one that I want to bring up is the word partition. So what is partitioning? You've probably heard people say they need to partition their hard drive or external hard drive. Because Mac and Windows have different file systems, when I bought my first external hard drive, I had to partition it into two different sections that my Mac could read and then one that my Windows could read. But what does it mean to partition the computer storage? Well, a partition is a section of the storage device, such as the hard disk drive or solid state drive. It is treated by the operating system as a separate logical volume, which makes it function similar to a separate physical device. So right now, if I were to pull up my File Explorer, you would find that my solid state drive in my computer is currently set to have one logical volume or partition. In Windows, we call that the C drive. However, there are lots of reasons why one might want to partition their storage into multiple volumes. Just to be abundantly clear, to partition simply means to divide computer storage into parts. So you have one part over here and another part over here, and they're treated as separate devices almost. So it's like if you were to plug in an external hard drive, it's treated as if you had two hard drives in your system as opposed to one large hard drive. So storage is given a beginning and an end, and it marks the area where the operating system can access. So those are kind of the meanings of partition. So what are some of the benefits? Why would we want to partition our device? Well, first of all, you want to divide your computer storage into parts. So of course, there is multiple reasons why you might want to divide your computer storage. First of all, it allows for organization and optimization. So maybe perhaps you would like to store some types of files in one hard drive and then another type of files in another hard drive. There's also the potential that you would like to allow for different file systems. So maybe you want a FAT file system on one and an NTFS file system on another. There's also lots of security reasons why you would want to partition your device into more than one hard drive. So you can hide your data. There's a possibility of making it to where one of your drives is hidden. So if somebody gets on your computer, they would not be able to find your other drive. You can also hide operating system recovery information. So in the case that your operating system gets taken over by malware, you can then use that part of the partition that didn't get touched by the malware to recover your operating system. There's also the ability to put your programs and your data into separate operating systems. So you have your programs in one and your data in the other. And then finally, you have the ability to dual boot your system. So you'll be able to put a Mac on one and a Windows on the other, or a Linux on one and a Mac on the other. It gives you the opportunity to be able to use two different operating systems. So there's lots of reasons why people partition their hard drive. It used to be required upon setup, but nowadays, the way we have our file system already set up onto our computers, they've been partitioned for us before we even touch them. So a lot of that stuff is done in the factory before we receive our computers. But you can still do it, and lots of people do. The next vocabulary word that I want to talk about is formatting, and it prepares the storage to be used by your operating system. So formatting removes any previous data that was on your computer. It then partitions the storage correctly for you, and then it adds a file system to organize your data. So partitioning our computer storage is something that we want to do in the process of formatting our storage. Formatting storage prepares it for use, and this is usually done, again, by your computer's manufacturer before you purchase it, which is why you have most likely not had to do this, or only had to do it if you were feeling extra crafty or had some sort of necessity. To format a hard drive or a solid state drive just means to erase any information on a drive and set up a file system in order for your computer to organize incoming data for storage. So one important note about formatting storage is that the data is actually never erased. So what happens is the directory is erased. So the table of contents is erased basically, so that the computer can never again find any of the previous information. It's not actually erased. It's just that your computer doesn't know about it. So once you go to store more information, your previous data will just be overwritten because it is now no longer, that space is now no longer allocated for stored information. It's now allocated for writing information. So just because you've deleted all the information in your computer does not mean that it's gone, which is why, and there's tons of forensic technology in the cybersecurity world and forensic investigations on your computer, which you can use tools to do and get into your computer and find lost information. And there's tons of information on that all over the web. Anyways, that is formatting. So why would we want to format? So it prepares our storage to be used by your operating system. It is the nuclear option. So remember that if you ever are going to format your computer, that you are getting rid of everything on there. So make sure you have any data that you have previously on your computer, it's backed up. So a good reason to also format your computer is in case you have malware. So it essentially stops malware from operating. And then bloatware. So sometimes Windows computers will come with, or Mac computers will come with preloaded programs that you don't want, and you can format your computer and it will get rid of those. So again, it's not permanent. I had mentioned this a second ago. It only removes the tables, so the file allocation table. So this is kind of what that file allocation table looks like. You have the file name and then the address of that file. So it just deletes this so that it can rewrite over that. That is all I have for you today. Now I want you to go and get into the module, go and read and watch the provided material that I put in there, and then make sure that you complete the module assignments, the participation, the quiz, and the assignment. And I think you're going to really like the participation and assignment this week. I think you're going to really enjoy it because we're actually getting into a little bit of Python. So don't forget to watch the tutorial on how to do Python, or how to get Python onto your computer. It's a very simple assignment this week. We'll really be getting into programming over the next couple of weeks. So anyways, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I am happy to help. We'll see you guys very soon.